All right, you ready to dive into the Wild West?
Always up for an adventure.
Today, it's all about the Hell on Wheels towns, those wild, wicked little towns that sprung up around the Transcontinental Railroad. Think saloons, gamblers, vigilantes.
Yeah, the whole nine yards. A real melting pot of ambition, opportunity, and, let's be honest, a whole lot of lawlessness.
Exactly. And we've got some amazing sources to dig into. First-hand accounts, newspaper articles, even a podcast episode.
Should be a fascinating look at a really pivotal moment in American history.
Okay, to kick things off, let's talk about the Bear River City Riot of 1868. Now, this wasn't just some bar fight. This riot really captures just how volatile these towns could get. Picture Bear River City, Wyoming, a place booming thanks to the Union Pacific Railroad.
Yeah, the population exploded practically overnight, attracting a mix of workers, businesses hoping to cash in, and of course, those who thrived on a lack of rules.
Right in the thick of it was a newspaper publisher named Lee Freeman. Now, Freeman was a big advocate for vigilante justice, which was already a bit controversial,
Yeah, I can see how that might rub some people the wrong way.
but he was also a staunch Confederate sympathizer.
Oh, wow. That's a recipe for trouble, especially with all the Union veterans working on the railroad.
You can say that again.
Yeah.
And his editorials, especially those criticizing Ulysses S. Grant, they were basically pouring fuel on a fire.
Not exactly a way to win over the locals.
So one night, 3 railroad workers get into some trouble, maybe a few too many drinks, and end up in the hands of these vigilantes.
Oh boy, here we go.
And that's when things get really interesting. A mob of over 200 railroad workers storms the jail, breaks out their comrades, and then they set their sights on Freeman and the vigilantes.
Wow, talk about mob justice. What happened to Freeman?
Well, that's where the stories get a little murky. Sources actually disagree on exactly how he managed to escape.
Really? What are some of the theories?
Some say a saloon owner hit him, others say he fled on a mule.
On a mule. That's a pretty memorable getaway vehicle.
There's even a story that he tricked the mob into thinking he was someone else. It just shows how wild and unpredictable these towns could be.
I can imagine trying to sort out fact from fiction and all that chaos.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And it highlights something really important about these Hell on Wheels towns. They were transient. As soon as the railroad moved on, the entire town packed up and followed.
Leaving almost nothing behind.
Practically nothing. Bear River City, for example, became a ghost town, swallowed by the very progress it helped create.
Fascinating. So these towns were almost like temporary encampments, their existence tied to the progress of the railroad. But to understand why they existed at all, we need to understand the driving force behind them, the Union Pacific Railroad.
And it all starts with a truly unique act of Congress, the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862. Now, this act didn't just authorize a railroad, it created a private company, the Union Pacific, and tasked it with building this enormous transcontinental railroad.
Wow, so the government essentially created a company and gave it this huge responsibility. Who was leading this endeavor?
A man named Dr. Thomas Durant. Not a medical doctor, mind you, but a doctor of shrewdness and ambition. Let's just say he wasn't afraid to bend the rules to get what he wanted.
Sounds like a character right out of a Western novel.
Oh, he definitely was. One of his biggest moves involved choosing the railroad's eastern terminus. This wasn't just about geography, it was about money and power. Durant had his sights set on Omaha, Nebraska.
Makes sense. Strategically locating the terminus would have huge financial implications.
Exactly. He even went up against President Lincoln himself, who initially favored Council Bluffs, Iowa.
Wow, going head-to-head with the president, Durant must have been pretty persuasive.
Or maybe just really good at playing the game. He'd already been buying up land in Omaha, anticipating the potential for massive profits if he could get the terminus there.
Oh, classic real estate speculation.
And what do you know? He managed to convince Lincoln, even though Lincoln knew it would open him up to accusations of corruption. That's Durant for you, always maneuvering.
It's amazing how individual ambition and political maneuvering can shape the course of history, isn't it? I mean, Durant's choice paved the way for Omaha's rise as a major city.
Absolutely. But Durant's maneuvering didn't stop there. He went on to create a construction company called Credit Mobilier, which would later become infamous for siphoning off government funds.
Ah, so the seeds of corruption were being sown right from the beginning.
You could say that, but let's not get too bogged down in the shady dealings just yet. Building the railroad wasn't just about financial schemes. It was also an incredible feat of engineering and labor. That's where the Ames brothers come in. Oliver and Oakes Ames.
These were the investors, right? The ones who provided crucial funding for the Union Pacific.
Exactly. They were drawn to the promise of progress, uniting the nation.
I can see the appeal. It was a truly ambitious project, full of potential.
Little did they know they'd get tangled up in the Credit Mobilier mess down the line.
Yeah, talk about being caught in the crossfire.
And then we have Grenville Dodge entering the picture. Now, Dodge was a respected engineer, a former advisor to Lincoln, and just the kind of no-nonsense leader the Union Pacific needed. He brought order to the often chaotic construction process.
So he was the one who brought a sense of order and efficiency to the project.
Precisely. And let's not forget the thousands of men who actually built the railroad. Civil War veterans, freedmen, immigrants, especially Irish workers.
A real mix of backgrounds and experiences coming together for this massive undertaking.
These guys faced brutal conditions, backbreaking labor, and sometimes even went on strike when Durant's financial gains delayed their pay.
It's easy to forget the human cost behind these grand projects, the sweat and toil that went into building the nation.
So we've got this backdrop of ambition, corruption, and backbreaking labor, and all along the way, these hell-on-wheels towns are popping up like mushrooms after a rain, each with its own flavor of chaos and opportunity.
It sounds like the Wild West stereotype come to life. Saloons, gambling dens, shootouts at high noon.
You got it. And that's where we'll pick up next time, exploring some of these infamous towns like Julesburg and Cheyenne. We'll uncover the lives of the people who lived there, the challenges they faced, and the legacy they left behind.
I can't wait. This is going to be fascinating. You know, while the Union Pacific was busy dealing with all their drama and those wide-open plains, the Central Pacific, their rival in this race to build the Transcontinental Railroad, they were facing a whole different beast, the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Oh, man. Those mountains are incredible even today. I can't imagine trying to blast tunnels and lay track through that terrain back in the 1860s.
It was a massive undertaking, a real testament to the skill and resilience of the Central Pacific's workforce, which, as you know, relied heavily on Chinese laborers.
Yeah, they don't always get the recognition they deserve.
Not at all. These workers faced incredible challenges, not only the physical dangers of the mountains, but also widespread prejudice and discrimination.
It's a stark reminder that the American story, especially when it comes to building this nation, it's deeply intertwined with the contributions of immigrants from all over the world.
Absolutely. Their stories are an essential part of our history.
So we've got these two companies, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, racing towards each other, each facing their own obstacles, all fueled by this ambition to connect the nation, to conquer the West.
It really was a time of incredible innovation and determination, pushing the boundaries of what people thought was possible.
And let's not forget the competition. Both companies were vying for territory and government subsidies, and the pressure to lay track as fast as possible. It must have been immense.
Absolutely. And remember Collis Huntington, the VP of the Central Pacific, he was a master strategist, always looking for an advantage.
Oh, yeah. He was a sharp guy.
Well, he saw an opportunity to really exploit the political climate during Reconstruction, all that tension between President Andrew Johnson and the Republicans.
I bet that played right into his hands.
It did. He convinced Congress that the previous limitation on the Central Pacific's territory, a move orchestrated by Durant to try and stifle their progress, that it was a grave error, even hinting at corruption.
Wow, so he basically turned the tables on Durant.
He did. It was a bold move, and it worked. Congress lifted the restriction, and the race was back on.
Can you imagine the pressure those crews must have felt, laying miles of track every day through all kinds of terrain and weather?
It must have been grueling, incredibly dangerous work. To really grasp the magnitude of what they accomplished, I think it helps to break down the construction process step by step.
Okay, walk me through it. What did it actually take to build this railroad?
Well, first you had the surveyors' men like Samuel Reed and James Evans going ahead of the construction crews, mapping the route and marking the path for the rails.
Those guys were the pioneers, venturing out into uncharted territory, facing harsh conditions and sometimes even hostile encounters.
Then came the grading crews, led by General Jack Casement, the same one we talked about in Julesburg, remember?
Oh yeah, tough as nails.
That's him. These crews literally reshaped the landscape, leveling the ground, filling in valleys, creating a foundation for the tracks.
It was backbreaking labor, often done under a scorching sun or in freezing temperatures.
And then you had the workers who laid the railroad ties, making sure they were level and secure before the rails could be placed.
It sounds like a giant moving assembly line stretching across the West.
It really was. And then came the most dramatic part, laying the rails themselves. Teams of men using tongs to lift these heavy, 30-foot rails, each one weighing over 500 pounds, carefully placing them onto the ties.
I could almost hear the clang of those rails being dropped into place.
And then the spikers would come in, hammering down the spikes that secured the rails to the ties. The sound must have been deafening, a rhythmic clang echoing across the prairie.
A symphony of labor, a real testament to human ingenuity and just sheer grit.
Exactly. And you mentioned earlier the diversity of the workforce. Tell me more about the people who made this happen.
Well, it was a real melting pot of backgrounds and experiences. You had Civil War veterans from both the North and the South, newly freed African Americans seeking a new life, and a large number of immigrants, particularly from Ireland.
Drawn to the West by the promise of work and opportunity.
They faced tremendous challenges, grueling work, harsh living conditions, and often unfair treatment, as you mentioned earlier. Durant's financial schemes sometimes delayed their pay.
It's a reminder that progress often comes at a cost.
But they kept at it, driven by a mix of necessity, ambition, and maybe even a sense of hope for a better future. They were building more than just a railroad. They were building a new chapter in American history.
Absolutely. And as the Union Pacific pushed westward, they reached a symbolic milestone. The 100th meridian, this line running down the middle of Nebraska, marked the official start of the Transcontinental Railroad's main line.
What was the significance of the 100th meridian?
Well, it essentially divided the wetter, more fertile eastern part of the country from the drier, more arid west. Crossing this line meant entering a new landscape, one that posed different challenges for agriculture and settlement.
So it was more than just a geographical marker. It represented a transition into a new uncharted territory, both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. And Durant, always the showman, decided to celebrate this achievement with a lavish party. He invited politicians, investors, even George Francis Train, the man who inspired the name Credit Mobilier. They traveled in luxurious Pullman cars, enjoying fine dining and scenic views as they rode along the newly laid tracks.
Sounds like something out of a Hollywood Western. A celebration of progress and opulence against the backdrop of the rugged West.
But in a move that might seem shocking today, Durant wanting to add a touch of authenticity to the experience, arranged for a staged attack by a group of Pawnee Indians.
You're kidding? A staged attack? Are you serious?
I know it's hard to believe, right? The guests were probably terrified, thinking they were about to be scalped.
It's a reminder of how different attitudes were back then, and how the romanticized view of the Wild West often glossed over the real experiences of Native Americans.
Exactly. The incident, while intended as entertainment, exposes the deep-seated prejudices and insensitivity that permeated the era. The impact of the railroad on Native American populations was profound and often devastating.
Their land was being cut, through their way of life, disrupted. It's a dark side of the Transcontinental Railroad story that we can't ignore.
Absolutely. And as the Union Pacific continued westward, it encountered another one of those infamous hell on wheels towns, Julesburg, Colorado. This is a place where, as one observer put it, everyone seemed bent on debauchery or dissipation. Saloons, gambling dens, and brothels thrived, and violence was a daily occurrence.
Sounds like the Wild West stereotype come to life.
Pretty much it's said that even the women carried derringers in their garters, and remember General Jack K-Smith, the toughest nails construction boss?
Yeah, he didn't mess around.
He had to use force to evict some gamblers who set up shop on Union Pacific land without permission.
He wasn't a man to be trifled with.
Just as quickly as it sprang up, Julesburg faded away, just like Bear River City. As the railroad moved on, so did the town, its inhabitants, and its particular brand of chaos.
So these towns were almost like temporary encampments.
Mm-hmm.
Their existence tied to the progress of the railroad.
Exactly. And then there's Cheyenne, Wyoming. Its founding was marked by a tragic event, an attack on a Mormon work crew hired by the Union Pacific. They were attacked by Native Americans, a grim reminder of the tensions and dangers that surrounded the railroad's construction.
Another example of how the railroad, while a symbol of progress, also brought conflict and upheaval.
It's a complex legacy, one that deserves a nuanced understanding.
By the end of 1866, the Union Pacific had laid an astounding 890 miles of track, reaching all the way to Bear River City, Utah. But the race was far from over.
The Central Pacific was pushing eastward with equal fervor, and the competition was about to intensify. Durant's web of schemes was starting to unravel, and the future of the Union Pacific was uncertain.
Sounds like we're heading for a dramatic showdown. Can't wait to see what happens next in this saga of the Transcontinental Railroad. It's really incredible when you think about it, this intense race. The Union Pacific pushing west across the plains, the Central Pacific battling those mountains. Each company, driven by ambition, facing these incredible challenges. It's a story of human grit and determination on a scale that's hard to even imagine.
And a story ingenuity, too, especially for the Central Pacific in those mountains. I mean, they were using cutting-edge techniques. Remember those Chinese laborers? They were carving tunnels, blasting through solid rock-laying track and some of the most treacherous terrain imaginable.
It's easy to overlook their contributions, but without those workers, I mean, think about it. They were lowered down steep cliffs in baskets to plant explosives. They were enduring harsh winters, all while facing discrimination and prejudice. It's a testament to their skill and their perseverance that railroad was even able to cross those mountains.
Absolutely. Their contribution is a huge part of the story of the Transcontinental Railroad. And it speaks to the bigger story, too, the diverse tapestry of labor, the significant role that immigrants played in shaping the American West.
We've talked about the ambition, the competition, the hardships, the corruption, but at the end of the day, the Transcontinental Railroad was about connection. It was about bridging this vast expanse of land and uniting a nation. And it's hard to overstate the impact it had on the American landscape and on our identity.
It really did revolutionize travel and trade. It spurred economic growth, fostered a sense of unity across the continent. Of course, progress like this doesn't come without a cost, and we've seen how the railroad also brought conflict and displacement, especially for Native American populations.
It's a complex legacy, full of triumphs and tragedies.
It really is,
Yeah.
but it's a story that I think captures the imagination, you
Yeah.
know? It offers these valuable insights into the forces that shaped the American West, the complexities of progress, and the enduring human spirit.
It's been an amazing journey diving into this era, learning about those hell-on-wheels towns, these larger-than-life characters like Dr. Durant, and just the sheer audacity of this whole endeavor.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating chapter in American history.
If anyone listening wants to explore this further, I highly recommend the History That Doesn't Suck podcast. They have a fantastic episode on the Transcontinental Railroad. They do a great job bringing the stories of those people and those challenges to life.
And for a deeper dive into the political and financial maneuvering behind the scenes, Nothing Like It in the World by Stephen Ambrose is a must-read.
So there you have it, a glimpse into the wild world of those hell-on-wheels towns. A fleeting moment in time, a microcosm of the Wild West, and a testament to that human drive to build, to connect, to conquer.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into this fascinating topic.
And if you did, don't forget to subscribe. We'll be back with more exciting explorations in your sources.
Until next time, happy exploring.